Ever told someone to knock on wood for good luck? Or maybe you've wished an actor break a leg before a show. These aren't just quirky little sayings, they're echoes of really old beliefs, bits of folklore that have snuck into our everyday chat. That wood you're knocking on? It's a throwback to pagan beliefs in tree spirits. And break a leg? Some folks say it's a way to trick mischievous spirits by saying the opposite of what you hope for. See? Folklore is all around us, often hiding in plain sight, especially in the words we use every day. So, that tiny little linguistic quirk, that line you might just toss out without thinking? It's like a whisper from way back, a living fossil of a story told centuries, maybe even millennia, ago. We're surrounded by these invisible threads, ancient tales woven so deeply into how we live now that we rarely, if ever, stop to notice them. But what if I told you these old stories, this folklore, isn't just about dusty books and forgotten traditions? What if it's actively shaping how you speak, the way you think, and the very core of your cultural identity, right this very moment? Today, we're pulling back the curtain to show you just how much folklore molds our language and culture, and why figuring this out is actually pretty important in our super fast, always changing world. Language is like this incredible, living tapestry. And folklore? It provides a ton of its most vibrant and lasting threads. It's a real wellspring for how language grows, constantly feeding it new words, phrases, and even nudging the very structure of how we talk to each other. Think about idioms, those colorful expressions that don't make a lick of sense literally, but we all know exactly what they mean. So many of these have their roots buried deep in folklore or old customs that have turned into stories over time. Take breaking the ice. We use it now to talk about easing social awkwardness, but it probably came from the actual practice of ships needing to smash through frozen rivers or seas to make a path, an act that literally opened up connection and passage. Or how about, bite the bullet, meaning to face something tough with courage. This pretty graphic phrase is thought to come from the days before good anesthetics, when wounded soldiers were actually given a bullet to bite down on during surgery to handle the pain. These expressions are like tiny, potent stories, packing a piece of historical practice or belief that's been handed down through language. But folklore doesn't just gift us idioms, it also has a huge hand in shaping regional dialects. Local tales, legends, and the histories of specific places often cook up unique vocabulary, ways of saying things, and turns of phrase that make one community's speech stand out from another. For instance, Scotland's rich folklore, with its kelpies and selkies, or the amazing myths of various indigenous cultures, these all bring unique words and ideas into their languages and dialects, making the whole linguistic landscape richer. These differences in language are way more than just charming quirks, they're like identity badges, carrying the specific cultural DNA of a region, often kept alive and passed on through its unique stories. The spoken word is the main way folklore travels, carrying a community's experiences, wisdom, and humor from one person to the next, generation after generation. Language, in this way, becomes a kind of living cultural archive. Linguists have been saying for ages that language isn't just a tool to get information across, it's the lens through which we see and make sense of the world. The words and phrases that pop up from, or are heavily colored by, folklore can subtly, or sometimes, not so subtly at all, reinforce cultural attitudes, stereotypes, and values. They help shape how people who speak a language see themselves, their own culture, and others. When a particular story, and the language it uses, paints certain traits as heroic or villainous, or certain actions as smart or silly, it helps build a shared understanding, a collective way of thinking. These are the invisible lines that folklore draws in our linguistic world, guiding how we understand things and how we express ourselves. So, if language is culture's voice, then folklore? Well, it's often its very soul. It gives us the foundational stories that shape how we see the world and our spot in it. It's so much more than just a bit of fun. Folklore is right at the heart of how cultural and national identities are formed, passed down, and even debated. At its core, folklore is like a community's memory keeper. Myths, legends, and those retold historical events, shared from one generation to the next, weave together a common story that connects people. This shared narrative offers a sense of continuity, a feeling of belonging to something bigger than just yourself. Think about those grand national epics, tales of heroic founders, or stories that explain how a local mountain or river got there. They all chip into a collective understanding of who we are and where we came from, and it's not just about shared history. Folktales are also amazing carriers of cultural values and moral compasses. Stories often pack obvious or not so obvious lessons about what a society thinks is right or wrong, what counts as brave, smart, kind, or just plain foolish. For instance, the trickster figure, like Anansi the spider in African and Caribbean folklore, often shows off wit, resilience, and the knack for turning the tables on oppressive powers. This reflects really important cultural survival skills and values. Over in Japan, the huge collection of yokai stories with their supernatural monsters and spirits often dig into the tricky but respectful relationship between humans and the natural, or supernatural, world, teaching lessons about boundaries and what happens when you cross them. These stories aren't just quaint little tales, they're like classrooms without walls, subtly planting the ethical seeds of a culture. Plus, the very act of sharing folklore is usually a get-together kind of thing. Storytelling nights, festivals, rituals, even lullabies sung to a baby, these are all moments where folklore bursts to life, making social bonds stronger and beefing up group identity. When people gather to hear or join in on these shared stories, they're not just soaking up information, they're actively taking part in something that reaffirms their ties to each other and to their common heritage. And here's another thing, folklore is pretty key in drawing and redrawing cultural lines. It helps mark out one group from another, sketching out what's us versus them. These stories and traditions can be a way to shout about a unique cultural identity, sometimes as a kind of pushback against outside pressures, or as a way to roll with the punches of changing social and political times. For example, if you look at Estonian folktales, you see this cool mix of pre-Christian pagan stuff with Christian themes. This doesn't just show the society's complicated history of blending in and resisting, it also helps mark out what makes Estonian culture Estonian, especially compared to its neighbors. In the same way, national folklore has often been deliberately used to build a sense of togetherness within a country or to tackle current issues, showing how it can dynamically define and redefine a culture. Okay, so we've seen how folklore shapes our words and lays down the foundation for our cultural norms. But those invisible threads we talked about? They run even deeper, tweaking our thought patterns, our sense of who we are, and the very values that steer our societies. And in our super-connected, fast-moving world today, these ancient stories are, maybe surprisingly, more important than you might think. One of the biggest jobs folklore has today is giving us a sense of cultural continuity and a way to adapt. In a world that's zipping along with new tech and global connections, which can sometimes feel a bit dizzying or like everything's becoming the same, folklore offers a kind of anchor. It's a connection to the past that can give us stability and meaning. But here's the cool part, folklore isn't stuck in the past. It's a living thing. Stories, sayings, and customs change over time, adapting to new situations, taking in new experiences, all while often holding on to the core wisdom they started with. This ability to change is a huge reason why it's still so powerful. Folklore also continues to be an amazing teaching tool. Long before there were schools as we know them, stories were the main way kids learned about their language, their history, their community's values, and their own place in the world. The cool narratives in folktales can make tricky ideas easy to get and hard to forget. They teach vocabulary and the finer points of language, they explain historical stuff, and they help young people get the hang of their culture's norms and expectations, which helps them build a solid sense of who they are. And, in our world that's more connected than ever, checking out folklore from different cultures is a fantastic way to build understanding between people and appreciate just how diverse we all are. When we listen to other people's stories, we start to see the common threads of being human, those universal themes of love, loss, courage, fear, and the hunt for meaning that pop up in every culture. But at the same time, we also bump into the unique ways of seeing things, beliefs, and values that make each culture special. This double vision, seeing our shared humanity and loving specific cultural flavors, is a big deal for building kind and more open societies. And hey, let's not forget how incredibly inspiring folklore is. It's always been a go-to source for writers, artists, musicians, and filmmakers. From Shakespeare's plays, which borrowed from British folk beliefs, to modern fantasy epics like The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter that are soaked in mythological ideas and folkloric creatures, these ancient stories keep getting new life. They offer up a goldmine of characters, themes, and plots that really click with people today, mostly because they tap into these super old patterns of storytelling. Popular culture, in lots of ways, is just an ongoing chat with the folklore of the past, showing that it's alive and kicking in our creative world right now. Those folkloric characters, the tricksters, the heroes, the monsters, they don't just hang out in old books, they're walking around in new disguises, still teaching us, still warning us, still firing us up. The incredible thing about folklore is that it's not just something that happened ages ago. It's happening right now. It lives in your family stories, in those idioms you use without a second thought, in the traditions you cherish. So, I'm really curious, what piece of folklore, maybe a saying, a story, a tradition, is alive and kicking in your life? Perhaps it's a quirky family expression and you've never really wondered where it came from, or a local legend you grew up hearing. I'd love for you to share it in the comments below. Let's see the amazing tapestry of folklore our community represents. And if you found these connections between ancient tales and our modern lives as fascinating as I do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ding the bell. We'll be exploring more cool topics that show the hidden forces shaping our world. So, as we've explored all the cool ways folklore shapes our language and molds our cultures, it's pretty clear these aren't just old stories stuck in the past. Nope, they're dynamic, powerful forces that are still buzzing in our daily lives. Folklore is like the invisible blueprint of how we understand each other, the secret code in our cultural DNA. It gives us those colorful idioms and catchy phrases that spice up our speech. It packs in the values, histories, and moral lessons that define our communities and nudge our behavior. It's a living, breathing link between where we've come from and where we're headed, giving us both roots and the wiggle room to adapt. To really get folklore is, in a very real sense, to get ourselves on a much deeper level. It's about recognizing the ancient echoes in our everyday chats, seeing the mythic patterns in what's happening today, and truly appreciating the huge, often unseen, power these stories still have. So, the next time you hear an old wives' tale, a peculiar idiom, or join in on a long-held tradition, just pause for a second. Listen really closely. You might just hear the whispers of generations gone by, actively shaping the world you're living in right now. And that, truly, is why it all matters.